The Galactic Academic Council's annual Xenobiology conference was, as always, a spectacular display of intellectual superiority. Picture this: a massive crystalline auditorium floating in the void between three dying stars, filled with the galaxy's most pompous, prestigious minds. The air recyclers hummed with the efficiency of a species that had solved faster than light travel, but still couldn't figure out how to make decent coffee. Professor Klaxon adjusted his ceremonial lab coat, his forearms twitching with barely contained excitement. As a Zephyrian, he looked like someone had crossbred a praying mantis with a university dean, complete with the insufferable air of academic superiority. His compound eyes gleamed as he surveyed the audience of 200 alien dignitaries, each representing a different species that had mastered interstellar travel, quantum physics, and the art of looking down on lesser civilizations. Colleagues, Klaxon began, his voice carrying the particular smugness reserved for those who had tenure across multiple star systems. But today we present our definitive study on the species known as Homo sapiens, or as we've come to call them, the curious bipedal mammals of Sol 3. Dr. Vera Thornwick, a reptilian anthropologist from the Silurian sector, nodded approvingly from her position at the presentation console. Her scales shifted from green to blue, indicating either scientific excitement or indigestion from the pre-conference meal. Having spent the last decade studying what she termed primitive civilizations, she had developed the kind of clinical detachment that came from observing species she considered intellectually inferior. After 50 years of careful observation, Vera interjected, her forked tongue flicking out to taste the recycled air. We can confidently state that humans represent perhaps the most predictable species we've ever encountered. Their behavioral patterns follow remarkably simple algorithms. Commander Zap Neutron, whose name was apparently not ironic in his culture, stood at attention despite having no backbone to speak of. As a gelatinous military strategist from the Omega Nebula, he resembled a particularly confident jellyfish stuffed into a uniform. His translucent body pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that, in his species, indicated supreme tactical confidence. From a military perspective, Zap announced, his voice gurgling slightly through his aqueous form, humans present no significant threat to galactic security. Their weapons are primitive, their tactics are disorganized, and they spend an alarming amount of time fighting each other instead of focusing on external threats. The audience rustled with approval. A delegate from the crystalline hegemony chimed like wind chimes in a hurricane, which roughly translated to finally, a species we can actually understand. The representative from the Hive Collective buzzed enthusiastically, already calculating how many humans could fit in their standard containment units. The data is conclusive, Klaxon continued, preening his antennae with obvious satisfaction. Humans are emotionally unstable, physically weak, and technologically backwards. They're obsessed with creatures they call pets that serve no practical purpose. They cry at moving pictures, and they actually choose to jump out of perfectly functional aircraft for something they call fun. Ambassador Gleep from the Quantum Consciousness Collective raised a tentacle. Are we certain they're actually sentient? This behavior sounds more like an elaborate biological algorithm than true intelligence. That's exactly what makes them so fascinating, Vera replied, her tail swishing with scientific enthusiasm. They're predictable to an almost mathematical degree. Show a human a button marked "Do not press," and they'll press it. Show them a sign that says "wet paint," and they'll touch it. Their curiosity operates on such basic parameters that we've been able to predict their actions with 97% accuracy. The audience was eating this up. After centuries of dealing with species that could fold space-time while composing poetry, or civilizations that communicated through controlled stellar explosions, humans seemed refreshingly simple. They were like a cosmic palate cleanser, a species so straightforward that even the most junior xenobiologist could understand their motivations. The implications are staggering, Zap added, his gelatinous form quivering with excitement. A species this predictable could be incredibly useful. They're already demonstrating remarkable aptitude for what they call service industries. Imagine having an entire species dedicated to customer service, manual labor, or entertainment. Dr. Klaxon's compound eyes literally sparkled. Colleagues, what we're presenting today isn't just a study. It's a roadmap for the easiest first contact protocol in galactic history. We know exactly how they'll react, exactly what they'll do, and exactly how to manage them. The conference hall buzzed with excitement. After millennia of careful diplomacy with species that could accidentally erase star systems while trying to parallel park, the prospect of dealing with a simple, predictable species was intoxicating. "Shall we begin the presentation?" Claxon asked, though it was clearly rhetorical. The assembled academics leaned forward in their various forms of seating, ready to witness the dissection of humanity's simple, predictable nature. If only they knew what was coming. "Let's start with the basics," Professor Claxon announced, his forearms dancing across the holographic display controls with the enthusiasm of someone who had never been wrong about anything, ever. Physical capabilities. The first chart materialized in the air, showing a human silhouette next to various alien species. The human looked pathetically small compared to the towering Goliaths of Proxima 7, laughably weak next to the rock creatures of Titan Prime, Set, and embarrassingly slow compared to the lightning-fast Zephyrians. "As you can see," Claxon continued, his voice dripping with scientific condescension, "humans are middling at best in every physical category. Average height, average strength, average speed. They can't survive in most planetary environments without artificial assistance. They require constant feeding, regular sleep cycles, and they actually stop functioning if the temperature varies by more than a few degrees." A ripple of amused clicks echoed through the audience. The delegate from the lava worlds literally steamed with what passed for laughter among molten rock beings. "But the truly fascinating part," Claxon said, clearly building to his favorite revelation, "is their complete inability to multitask. Unlike our Zephyrian cognitive matrix, which can process 17 different thought streams simultaneously, humans can barely walk and chew their food at the same time." Dr. Vera Thornwick slithered forward, her scales shifting to a lecturing shade of academic yellow. "From a psychological perspective, humans are even more predictable than their physical limitations suggest. They form emotional attachments to literally anything. We've observed humans crying over fictional characters, bonding with inanimate objects, and developing deep emotional connections with creatures that can't even survive in their natural environment." The holographic display shifted to show various Earth animals: dogs, cats, hamsters, goldfish. The alien audience stared in bewilderment. "They keep these creatures in their homes," Vera explained, her forked tongue tasting the air with scientific disgust, "feed them, clean up after them, and spend enormous amounts of resources on their care. The creatures provide no practical benefit. They don't enhance human strength, intelligence, or survival capabilities. They're literally evolutionary dead weight." Commander Zap Neutron pulsed forward, his translucent form glowing with military certainty. "This emotional instability extends to their combat doctrine. Human military history is essentially a catalog of tactical errors driven by sentiment. They consistently choose inefficient strategies because they're unwilling to sacrifice individual units." The military display showed various battle formations, with human tactics highlighted in what could only be described as embarrassingly naive colors. "Observe their concept of honor in combat," Zap continued, his gelatinous body rippling with professional disdain. "They actually have rules about how to fight wars, treaties, conventions. They've agreed to limit their own effectiveness in combat because they consider certain weapons inhumane. Can you imagine voluntarily handicapping yourself in a survival situation?" The audience was loving this. The representative from the Hive Collective's collective consciousness hummed with appreciation, while the delegate from the Machine Intelligence Cooperative processed the data with visible satisfaction. "But here's the most revealing part," Vera announced, her tail swishing with the excitement of delivering a particularly damning piece of evidence. "Their decision-making process is completely dominated by what they call feelings. They'll make demonstrably irrational choices because something feels right or because they love someone." The holographic display showed human brain scans, with emotional centers highlighted in pulsing red. "Look at these neural patterns," Vera continued. "When faced with logical decisions, the emotional centers of their brains literally override their rational thought processes. They're biologically programmed to make suboptimal choices. Claxon nodded sagely, his compound eyes reflecting the data with scientific satisfaction. This is why their technological advancement has been so remarkably slow. They had the theoretical knowledge for faster-than-light travel centuries ago, but they got distracted by what they call ethics committees and environmental concerns. From a tactical standpoint, Zapp added, this makes them incredibly easy to predict and counter. Their emotional responses follow clear patterns, threaten something they care about, and they'll abandon sound strategy. Offer them something that makes them feel good, and they'll ignore obvious logical flaws. The audience was practically purring with satisfaction. Finally, a species that made sense. After dealing with civilizations that made decisions based on quantum probability matrices or collective consciousness algorithms, humans seemed refreshingly simple. The implications for first contact are obvious, Claxon concluded, his antennae twitching with academic triumph. We know exactly how they'll react to our presence. First, they'll be afraid. Then, they'll be curious. Then, they'll want to be our friends. They're biologically programmed to seek approval from what they perceive as superior beings. Dr. Zeep from the crystalline hegemony chimed up, literally. Are we certain they're ready for contact? Their emotional instability seems like it could be problematic. That's the beauty of it, Vera replied, her scales shifting to a confident green. Their emotional instability is exactly what makes them manageable. They're so desperate for connection and approval that they'll accept almost any arrangement as long as it's presented in a way that makes them feel special. The conference hall buzzed with excitement. After millennia of careful diplomacy with species that could accidentally destabilize local space-time, the prospect of dealing with a simple, emotional species was intoxicating. Shall we review some historical footage to demonstrate these principles in action? Claxon asked, though he was clearly already reaching for the playback controls. The assembled academics settled in for what they expected to be a thoroughly entertaining demonstration of human predictability and weakness. They had no idea what they were about to witness. Let's start with some historical context, Professor Claxon announced, his forearms manipulating the holographic controls with the confidence of someone who had never encountered a fact that contradicted his theories. We'll begin with what humans call their medieval period to demonstrate their primitive approach to conflict resolution. The first footage materialized in the conference hall, armored knights charging across a field, banners fluttering, horses thundering. The alien audience settled back in their various forms of seating, ready to be amused by primitive warfare. Observe their tactical approach, Commander Zap Neutron gurgled with professional disdain. They literally charge at each other with pointed metal sticks while sitting on domesticated animals. No coordinated energy weapons, no shield matrices, no orbital support. Just organic beings hitting each other with crude implements. A delegate from the Photonic Collective flickered with what passed for laughter among beings of pure light. Do they not possess ranged weapons? Oh, they do, Dr. Vera Thornwick replied, her scales shifting to an amused purple. But observe their code of honor in action. They actually consider it more noble to fight in close combat. They voluntarily choose the most inefficient method of warfare because it makes them feel heroic. The footage continued, showing medieval battles in all their chaotic glory. The alien audience was thoroughly entertained by what they perceived as primitive tactical incompetence. Now let's move forward to their First World War, Claxon announced, clearly building to what he considered his most damning evidence. This demonstrates their complete inability to adapt to changing circumstances. The scene shifted to the muddy, crater-filled landscape of the Western Front. Trenches stretched to the horizon, filled with soldiers who looked like they hadn't seen sunlight in months. Observe their solution to defensive technology, Zap announced, his gelatinous form rippling with military superiority. Instead of developing countermeasures, they simply dig holes in the ground and sit in them. For years. The footage showed soldiers charging across no man's land, falling by the thousands, then doing it again the next day. The alien audience was bewildered by what appeared to be tactical insanity. This is where their emotional instability becomes most apparent, Vera added, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining something to particularly slow children. Rational beings would recognize the futility of this approach and negotiate a settlement. Instead, they continued this pattern for 4 years, losing millions of individuals for minimal territorial gains. But then something in the footage caught the attention of a few audience members. A human soldier, wounded and separated from his unit, crawling through the mud to drag an injured comrade to safety. He was clearly hurt, clearly exhausted, but he kept going. "What is that individual doing?" asked Dr. Gleep, his tentacles curling with confusion. "Oh, that's their buddy system," Klaxon replied dismissively. "They're emotionally incapable of abandoning injured unit members, even when it's tactically sound to do so. It's a significant tactical weakness." The footage continued, showing more examples of soldiers risking everything to save their comrades. The alien audience began to shift uncomfortably. This wasn't quite the simple incompetence they'd expected to see. "Let's move to their Second World War," Vera announced, perhaps a bit too quickly. "This really demonstrates their inability to learn from past mistakes." The new footage showed the beaches of Normandy, boats approaching through heavy fire, soldiers jumping into water that was literally boiling with explosions. "Observe their approach to fortified positions," Zapp announced, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "They're literally running directly into concentrated fire. No tactical subtlety, no sophisticated countermeasures, just charging forward." But as the footage continued, something strange happened. The humans kept coming. Wave after wave of them, falling, dying, but more kept coming. Some were clearly terrified, some were obviously injured, but they kept moving forward. "Why aren't they retreating?" asked Ambassador Gleek, his crystalline form resonating with confusion. "Because they're emotionally compromised," Klaxon replied, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "They're incapable of making rational tactical decisions under stress." The footage showed a medic running through gunfire to treat wounded soldiers, completely ignoring his own safety. Then another soldier throwing himself on a grenade to protect his comrades. Then a pilot, his aircraft clearly damaged, choosing to ram an enemy ship rather than abandon his mission. The conference hall had grown uncomfortably quiet. This wasn't the predictable, emotion-driven incompetence they'd expected to see. "Perhaps we should move to more recent conflicts," Vera suggested, her scales shifting to a nervous yellow-green. The footage shifted to Vietnam, showing soldiers fighting in jungle conditions that would kill most alien species within hours. The humans looked miserable, exhausted, and completely outmatched by their environment. But they kept fighting. "Here we see their inability to adapt to environmental challenges," Zapp announced, though his bioluminescent patterns were flickering with uncertainty. "They're clearly not evolved for this type of terrain, yet they persist in maintaining combat operations." But as the footage continued, the alien audience watched humans doing impossible things. A soldier carrying a wounded comrade for miles through jungle that looked like a green hell. A pilot flying rescue missions into areas that were essentially suicide runs. A medic treating patients while under fire, completely focused on his work despite explosions going off around him. "This behavior is anomalous," Dr. Zeep chimed uncertainly. "It's just their emotional instability," Klaxon insisted. But his compound eyes were beginning to show the first signs of what his species experienced when confronted with data that didn't fit their theories. The footage showed a human soldier, clearly outgunned and surrounded, choosing to call in an airstrike on his own position, rather than surrender information that might harm his unit. The alien audience watched in stunned silence as this supposedly predictable, emotion-driven creature made the ultimate tactical sacrifice. "Perhaps," Vera suggested, her voice much smaller than it had been at the beginning of the presentation, "we should take a brief intermission to review our analysis." But it was too late. The footage had opened a crack in their understanding, and that crack was about to become a chasm. The intermission had done nothing to calm the growing unease in the conference hall. If anything, the whispered conversations between species had only amplified the confusion. The crystalline hegemony delegates were chiming in discord, the Hive Collective was buzzing with competing theories, and the photonic beings were flickering at frequencies that indicated deep philosophical distress. Professor Klaxon's compound eyes were twitching as he returned to the podium, his earlier confidence replaced by the kind of desperate determination that academics display when their life's work is being contradicted by inconvenient facts. Colleagues. He began, his voice carrying a slight tremor that he probably thought was imperceptible. What we observed in the previous footage was merely an extension of humans' well-documented emotional instability. Their inability to make rational decisions under stress, while tactically inefficient, can occasionally produce unexpected results. Dr. Vera Thornwick's scales had shifted to a color that roughly translated to impending academic crisis. Her tail was twitching with the kind of nervous energy that came from watching 50 years of research crumble in real time. "Let's examine more recent conflicts," she announced, though her voice lacked the clinical confidence it had carried earlier. "Modern warfare will demonstrate that human technological advancement hasn't improved their fundamental tactical limitations." The footage shifted to show modern combat operations. Desert warfare, urban combat, situations that would challenge even the most advanced alien species. But instead of the expected incompetence, the audience watched humans adapting to impossible conditions with terrifying efficiency. "Here we see human forces operating in temperatures that would kill most galactic species within minutes," Commander Zap Neutron announced, his gelatinous form pulsing with increasingly frantic bioluminescence. They're clearly struggling with the environmental conditions. But the humans in the footage weren't just surviving, they were thriving. Special forces units moving through desert terrain with precision that would impress the most elite alien commandos. Soldiers maintaining equipment and morale in conditions that looked like the surface of a hostile planet. This is not consistent with our projections," Dr. Gleep admitted, his tentacles curling with academic distress. "It's an anomaly," Klaxon insisted, but his voice cracked slightly. "Human unpredictability is well documented. They occasionally produce outlier results due to their emotional instability." The footage continued, showing human soldiers in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other conflicts. But something was becoming clear that none of the alien academics wanted to acknowledge. These weren't emotionally unstable primitives stumbling through combat. These were apex predators who had turned warfare into an art form. "Perhaps we should examine historical precedents," Vera suggested desperately. "The Battle of Thermopylae should demonstrate their tactical limitations." The footage shifted to show the famous battle, but instead of the expected primitive incompetence, the audience watched 300 Spartan warriors hold off an army that outnumbered them by orders of magnitude. "You see," Klaxon announced with forced confidence, "they chose to fight an unwinnable battle due to their emotional attachment to abstract concepts like honor and duty. Clearly irrational behavior." But as the footage continued, something in the alien audience's understanding began to shift. These weren't irrational primitives making emotional decisions. These were warriors who had calculated the odds, understood the cost, and chosen to pay it anyway. "The mathematical precision of their tactical positioning is remarkable," Dr. Zeep chimed reluctantly. "It's just coincidence," Zap insisted, but his bioluminescent patterns were now flickering in what his species experienced as existential panic. "They got lucky." 9. The footage shifted to show human disaster response, firefighters running into burning buildings, Coast Guard crews launching into storms that would destroy most alien vessels, emergency medical teams working in conditions that would challenge the most advanced galactic medical facilities. "This behavior is not consistent with self-preservation instincts," Ambassador Gleek observed, his crystalline form resonating with confusion. "They're deliberately placing themselves in danger to protect others." "It's their emotional instability," Vera repeated, but her scales were now shifting through colors that indicated deep psychological distress. "They're incapable of rational risk assessment." But the audience was beginning to see something else. These weren't random acts of emotional instability. There was a pattern, a logic to human behavior that was both alien and terrifying in its implications. The footage showed a human mother lifting a car to save her trapped child, adrenaline giving her strength that should have been physically impossible. It showed a teacher shielding students with her own body during a school shooting. It showed ordinary humans doing extraordinary things when the stakes were high enough. "The energy expenditure calculations don't work," Dr. Gleep admitted, his tentacles now writhing with academic panic. They're exceeding their theoretical physical limitations. Measurement error, Claxon insisted, but his voice had become a high-pitched whine. The footage shifted to show human space exploration, astronauts strapped to controlled explosions, hurling themselves into the void with technology that any sane species would consider experimental at best. They were exploring environments that would kill them in seconds, just to see what was there. Why would they do this? Asked the delegate from the Quantum Consciousness Collective, its multiple probability states collapsing into a single expression of bewilderment. Because, Vera whispered, her scales now displaying colors that had no translation in any known language, they want to know what's out there. The conference hall had gone dead silent. The assembled academics, representatives of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, were staring at footage of a species that shouldn't exist according to everything they thought they knew about evolutionary psychology. Perhaps, Claxon suggested, his voice barely audible, we should review our data collection methods. But it was too late. The crack in their understanding had become a chasm, and they were about to fall into it. The conference hall had taken on the atmosphere of a funeral. If funerals were attended by beings who had just discovered that their entire understanding of reality might be fundamentally flawed. The soft hum of the air recyclers seemed unnaturally loud in the silence that followed the last piece of footage. Professor Claxon's compound eyes were twitching in patterns that indicated severe academic distress among his species. His forearms moved frantically over the holographic controls, as if he could somehow reorganize the data into something that made sense. There must be some explanation, he muttered, his voice carrying the desperate tone of someone whose life's work was collapsing in real time. Perhaps we should examine their special forces operations. Surely that will demonstrate their tactical limitations. Dr. Vera Thornwick's scales had shifted to a color that roughly translated to existential crisis in progress. Her tail was wrapped around her body in a defensive posture as she stared at the holographic display with the kind of horror usually reserved for discovering that one's entire species had been pronouncing a fundamental mathematical constant incorrectly. Claxon, she whispered, perhaps we should consider that our initial assumptions might have been. No, Claxon interrupted, his voice cracking with academic panic. The data is clear. Humans are predictable. They're emotional. They're weak. We just need to find the right examples. The footage shifted to show human special forces operations. Navy SEALs emerging from water that should have been too cold for biological survival. Army Rangers operating in mountain conditions that would challenge most alien species' environmental suits. Delta Force units moving through urban environments with precision that would impress the most advanced AI tactical systems. This is not what we expected, Commander Zap Neutron admitted, his gelatinous form pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that indicated complete tactical bewilderment. They're not just surviving these conditions. They're excelling in them. The footage showed a human soldier continuing to fight after taking injuries that should have incapacitated any rational being. Then another one carrying a wounded comrade while under fire, moving with purpose and determination that defied every psychological profile they'd developed. The injury tolerance calculations are impossible, Dr. Gleep observed, his tentacles curling with mathematical distress. They're operating at effectiveness levels that exceed their theoretical physical limitations. It's adrenaline, Claxon insisted desperately. Just biochemical reactions. Nothing more. But the footage kept coming. A human pilot, his aircraft damaged and systems failing, choosing to continue his mission rather than abort. The soldier calling in artillery fire on his own position to prevent enemy advancement. A medic treating patients while literally under fire, completely focused on his work despite explosions going off around him. This behavior is not rational, the delegate from the Machine Intelligence Cooperative processed aloud. They're making decisions that prioritize mission success over individual survival. Because they're emotionally compromised, Vera repeated, but her voice was barely a whisper now. The footage shifted to show what the research team had apparently labeled as recreational human activities. The alien audience watched in growing horror as humans threw themselves off cliffs with nothing but fabric wings, dove into water from impossible heights, and climbed vertical rock faces using only their hands and feet. "Why would they do this?" asked Dr. Zeep, his crystalline form chiming with confusion. "There's no tactical advantage, no survival benefit. They're deliberately placing themselves in mortal danger for no rational purpose." "Because," Zap whispered, his bioluminescent patterns flickering with what his species experienced as a complete worldview collapse, "they want to see if they can." But the real breakdown came when someone in the research team had apparently included what they'd labeled as human recreational combat footage. The aliens watched in stunned silence as humans engaged in activities they called mixed martial arts, boxing, and extreme sports. "They fight each other for entertainment?" Ambassador Gleek asked, his crystalline form resonating with frequencies that indicated deep philosophical distress. "And people watch it," Vera added, her scales now displaying colors that had no translation in any known language. "They pay money to watch other humans hurt each other." The footage showed a human fighter, clearly outmatched and battered, refusing to quit, taking punishment that would hospitalize most alien species, but getting back up and continuing to fight. The crowd was cheering, not with bloodlust, but with respect for the fighter's determination. "This is not rational behavior," Dr. Gleep stated, his tentacles now writhing with academic panic. "They're celebrating the refusal to accept logical defeat." But the final straw came when someone played what had been labeled as human recreational risk-taking compilation. The alien audience watched humans doing things that defied every survival instinct known to galactic biology: base jumping, free climbing, motorcycle racing, deep-sea diving, and what appeared to be intentional interaction with dangerous predators. "Hold my beer," one human said in the footage before attempting something that should have been instantly fatal. The phrase was translated into every language present in the hall, and the effect was immediate and devastating. The crystalline hegemony delegates began chiming in discord so severe that several of them cracked. The hive collective's buzzing reached frequencies that indicated collective mental breakdown. The photonic beings began flickering at rates that suggested they were questioning the fundamental nature of existence itself. "They say hold my beer, and then deliberately attempt to violate the laws of physics," Dr. Zeep observed, his crystalline form now emitting sounds that indicated complete academic capitulation. "And they succeed," Zap added, his gelatinous form now pulsing with patterns that his species displayed when confronted with tactical impossibilities. "They actually succeed." The conference hall erupted in chaos. Delegates were fainting, vomiting, and experiencing what appeared to be species-specific nervous breakdowns. The representative from the quantum consciousness collective's multiple probability states collapsed into a single expression of existential terror. "Emergency medical protocols," Claxon announced weakly, his compound eyes now displaying the kind of academic defeat that came from discovering that everything he thought he knew about xenobiology was not just wrong, but catastrophically wrong. As medical teams rushed to assist the various delegates experiencing psychological crises, one thought echoed through the conference hall: if humans were this unpredictable, this resilient, this impossibly determined in their recreational activities, what would they be like if they were actually angry? The answer to that question, they realized with growing horror, might be something the galaxy wasn't prepared to discover. 3 months later, the emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in what could only be described as an atmosphere of barely controlled panic. The usual pomp and circumstance of galactic governance had been replaced by the kind of frantic energy typically reserved for natural disasters or impending stellar collapse. The council chamber, normally a testament to the ordered magnificence of galactic civilization, it now resembled a psychiatric ward designed by beings who had lost faith in the fundamental predictability of the universe. Security had been increased not to protect against external threats, but to prevent council members from doing anything rash after reviewing the infamous human studies incident. Ambassador Gleek, representing the crystalline hegemony, chimed into the chamber with frequencies that indicated he was still recovering from what his species called fundamental worldview reconstruction therapy. His crystalline form bore small cracks that were apparently the physical manifestation of existential distress. "Order, order," he announced, though his harmonic resonance suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as the assembled delegates. "We are here to address Resolution 2847X regarding the the species known as humans. The chamber fell silent except for the nervous buzzing of the hive collective representative, who had required extensive psychological rehabilitation after what medical reports described as collective consciousness fragmentation due to incomprehensible xenobiological data. The chair recognizes the emergency committee report, Gleek continued, his chiming becoming more stable as he focused on procedural formalities. Dr. Zenth, a being of pure energy who had been brought in specifically because her species was considered immune to psychological trauma, flickered into visibility at the center of the chamber. Even she seemed dimmer than usual. Honored delegates, she began, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent 3 months reviewing footage that challenged every assumption about biological limitations. The committee has reached a unanimous conclusion regarding the species designation human. The chamber held its collective breath, or whatever passed for breathing among the various species present. After extensive analysis of the data presented at the Xenobiology Conference, cross-referenced with additional observational data spanning the last 50 years, we have determined that our initial assessment of human capabilities was incomplete. A nervous ripple ran through the chamber. The delegate from the photonic collective flickered with what passed for anxiety among beings of pure light. How incomplete? Asked the representative from the Machine Intelligence Cooperative, his voice carrying the kind of digital distortion that occurred when AI systems encountered logic loops they couldn't resolve. Dr. Zenth's energy form pulsed with what her species experienced as reluctant admission of professional failure. Our behavioral prediction models have been revised from 97% accuracy to 8%. The chamber erupted in chaos. The gelatinous delegates began flowing in patterns that indicated collective panic. The insectoid representatives' chittering reached frequencies that suggested they were considering a return to their homeworlds to reconsider their life choices. Order. Gleek chimed desperately, his crystalline form resonating with authority frequencies. What are the committee's recommendations? Dr. Zenth flickered more intensely, which among her species indicated the kind of professional embarrassment that came from having to admit that everything they thought they knew about a subject was not just wrong, but dangerously wrong. The committee recommends the immediate implementation of Galactic Resolution 2847X, also known as the Do Not Poke the Humans Directive. The formal resolution appeared in the chamber's holographic display, its text causing several delegates to experience what appeared to be species-specific panic attacks. Galactic Resolution 2847X. Under no circumstances, for any reason, should the species known as humans be provoked, threatened, or otherwise given reason to believe that their planet, their species, or their way of life is in danger. Any contact with humans must be approached with extreme caution and preferably avoided entirely until further study can be conducted by beings with stronger psychological constitutions. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, species that had mastered faster than light travel, controlled stellar engineering, and achieved post-scarcity economies, were officially declaring themselves afraid of a species that still used chemical rockets and couldn't agree on a universal calendar system. What happened to the original research team? Asked the delegate from the Quantum Consciousness Collective, its multiple probability states wavering with concern. Dr. Zenth's energy form dimmed noticeably. Professor Claxon has requested a transfer to the Xenobotany Department, where he now specializes in the study of non-sentient space fungi. He has specifically requested that his research subjects be incapable of movement, emotion, or any form of decision-making. A sympathetic murmur ran through the chamber. Several delegates had apparently made similar career adjustments after reviewing the human studies data. Dr. Vera Thornwick has taken a leave of absence and is currently pursuing what she calls meditative contemplation of the fundamental unpredictability of existence. She has been observed sitting motionless in her quarters, occasionally muttering phrases like "they jumped off the cliff because it was there and hold my beer." The chamber's atmosphere grew even more somber. The phrase "hold my beer" had become something of a galactic shorthand for the moment when rational planning died and chaos took the wheel. "And the graduate students?" inquired the delegate from the Telepathic Confederacy, his mental projections wavering with what appeared to be survivor's guilt. 3 have changed their majors to theoretical mathematics. One has joined a monastery on Kepler 442 billion, where he spends his days contemplating the serenity of predictable orbital mechanics. The remaining two have requested assignment to the Deep Space Observation Station at the edge of the Andromeda Galaxy, where they study the comforting emptiness of intergalactic space. The chamber processed this information with the kind of solemn silence typically reserved for memorial services. "What about the humans themselves?" asked the representative from the Hive Collective, his individual consciousness still showing signs of strain from his species' recent psychological fragmentation. "Are they aware of our concerns?" Dr. Zenth's energy form pulsed with what her species considered dark humor. "Current intelligence suggests that humans remain completely unaware of our existence. They continue to engage in what they call extreme sports, apparently for recreational purposes. Recent observations include something called volcano boarding and free solo rock climbing. Our analysts have stopped trying to understand the survival benefit of these activities." The machine intelligence representative circuit sparked with what passed for exasperation among artificial beings. "Have we considered the possibility that humans are not actually trying to survive, but are instead engaged in some form of species-wide performance art?" The committee has investigated this hypothesis. Dr. Zenth replied, her energy form flickering with bureaucratic precision. "However, humans appear to be genuinely surprised when they survive their own activities. This suggests either remarkable commitment to their performance, or—" She paused, her form dimming as she accessed files that still caused her processing cores to overheat. "Or they genuinely believe that activities like wingsuit flying and ice climbing are reasonable recreational choices." The chamber fell into the kind of silence that follows the revelation of information too disturbing to process immediately. Several delegates began engaging in what appeared to be species-specific meditative practices. Ambassador Gleek's crystalline form resonated with the frequency of someone trying to maintain professional composure while reality crumbled around him. The chair calls for a vote on Resolution 2847X. All in favor? The response was immediate and unanimous. Every appendage, probability state, energy signature, and collective consciousness in the chamber indicated agreement. "The resolution passes," Gleek announced, his chiming carrying the weight of galactic policy. Effective immediately, the species known as humans is classified as a Class CI, unpredictable biological entity. All contact protocols are suspended indefinitely. Any research into human behavior must be conducted by volunteers with certified psychological resilience ratings, and even then, only with mandatory therapeutic support. As the session concluded, the delegates began filing out of the chamber with the measured movements of beings who had just participated in something that would be remembered as either the most prudent decision in galactic history or the most embarrassing. In the corridors outside the chamber, small groups of delegates gathered to discuss the implications of what had just occurred. The conversation was subdued, marked by the kind of careful optimism that follows the successful management of an existential crisis. "At least," observed the delegate from the Rational Thought Collective, "we can be confident that humans will never develop faster than light travel. Their approach to problem-solving is far too chaotic to master the precise calculations required for interstellar navigation." The comment was met with nervous agreement from several nearby delegates, who found comfort in the idea that the humans would remain safely contained within their own solar system. None of them had reviewed the recent Human Space Agency reports about something called the Alcubierre drive, or noted the alarming frequency with which humans used phrases like "let's try this" and see what happens in their scientific literature. But that would be a problem for future galactic councils to address. For now, the galaxy's most advanced civilizations had officially acknowledged what every human parent had known for millennia. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is dare someone to prove they can't do something impossible. The resolution was filed, the protocols updated, and the human species was quietly removed from the list of civilizations suitable for first contact. And in a small corner of the galaxy, on a blue planet orbiting an unremarkable star, humans continued to exist in blissful ignorance of the fact that they had just become the universe's most feared species, without firing a single shot or making a single threat. They accomplished this feat by doing what humans had always done, approaching the impossible with the unshakable confidence that someone, somewhere, had probably done something even more ridiculous and lived to tell about it. The galaxy, for its part, decided it was perfectly content to let them continue believing that bungee jumping was a normal way to spend a weekend. Some truths, after all, were too dangerous to share,